Hi guys! Today I thought I would show you a little tour through my ink collection. I have so many inks. It is more ink than a normal person needs, so please don't aspire to have a collection like I do. These were collected. That's exactly what it is. It's a collection. I've been documenting scrapbooking, card making for a very long time, so all of these inks have been collected over, oh god, decades, at least 15 years, so I definitely did not run out and buy all of these in one go. And so I do have a lot of ink. I've got a lot of favorites and I'm going to show you through those today. So I keep pretty much all of my inks in my drawers here. I've got 2 drawers full of ink because, like I said, I have more ink than any normal person needs. So I don't really have any setups to order or anything in here. It's just what sort of fits in here. So I've got all my Memento inks, which were in here as well, and I've kind of had to, can I put one out here? I've had to double stack these now because I needed more room to put these Catherine Pooler inks in. All of these little inks are ones I don't use very often. My pigment inks, so they're just little Versacolor ones, or there's some Studio Calico ones in there as well. And then all my other dye inks are in here, so all my Colour Theory ones from Studio Calico, and I mean these were a Beautiful Mess inks, but they're the same thing, they're the same brand, they're by Inked. All my black, they're not all black, I guess they're the plain inks, the black, the white, the Versafine, and my Versamark. And then at the back are all my Hero Arts inks. And apart from these 2 drawers, the only other inks I have are in here. Let's see if I can do this without tipping them onto the floor. And that is just all my distress inks. They're just little minis. I don't have those fancy tins. I just have this container here, which works fine because I hardly ever use these ones, to be honest. They're more sort of card making inks, and I don't do a lot of card making anymore. So they just get put away in here. So that's all my ink storage, and as I said, now that I'm adding these Catherine Pooler ones, and I'm probably going to add some more because I really like them, I sort of feel like I need a better option, or I at least need more room. So I'm going to have to investigate that a little bit, but let me pull some of these out and I'll show you what I like about them. So I'll just go through some of these inks with you and show you what it is that I like about it. Obviously, probably the 2 most used inks for me are the Memento Tuxedo Black and the Brilliance Moonlight White, which is going to be super hard to show you because I've never found a white ink that works great on like coloured cardstock, but the Moonlight White works perfectly on stamping on photos, which is where it really shines, and that's what I love it. I've mentioned a million times before that the reason it stamps well on my photos is because I use Canon Photo Glossy 2 paper. I print at home. The paper is designed to absorb ink from an inkjet printer, so it also absorbs ink from stamping really well too, which is why the Moonlight White works really well. But as far as stamping white onto coloured cardstock, your best bet is to use a pigment ink of some sort, Versamark, and use a white embossing powder. That's really, it's really going to be the best way to get a perfectly white impression onto coloured cardstock. So my favourite ink for just ease of use, and it really is just the nicest ink that I found, is my Memento Tuxedo Black. It stamps really nicely. It dries really quickly. It just has nice crisp impressions, and I don't necessarily have to clean it off my block. I'm not a huge fan of pigment ink because I like to work quickly, so I don't want to have to wait for it to dry. And anytime I have used it and don't wait for it to dry, I end up smearing it over something. So my preference is just about always dye ink, except like I was saying, if you're going to use embossing powder or anything like that, you're going to need a tacky ink. So that's what the Versamark is for. I do use that occasionally. You can see how cruddy this pad is. It probably needs replacing. I don't do heat embossing an awful lot, but when I do, this is what I use. I don't like using coloured pigment inks underneath embossing powders because they can alter the colour of the powder. So unless that's something you're attempting to do, I do stick with Versamark because it is clear. Or you could use something like the Brilliance Moonlight White if you were going to use white embossing powder to make it like super white. But otherwise I stick with Versamark. And the only other ink that I probably use on a fairly regular basis is the StazOn ink. And that's just for when I know I've got like a slippery surface, or it's I don't even know what you call it, a solvent ink. So this really does stick to everything, including your stamps. So I will stamp this one here. And you can see, and unless you do clean that really quickly, and even when you do clean it really quickly, it does stain your stamps quite badly. That doesn't make any, it doesn't harm your stamps in any way, so there's no problem with this. It's just if you prefer to keep your stamps clean, then this is not the way to go. But it is helpful for stamping on things like vellum. You do have to be careful when you stamp on vellum, even with the StazOn, that you really are stamping straight down and straight up. It will slip, so you can smear an image really easily stamping on vellum, or it will stamp on acetate if you want to stamp on acetate. It isn't an opaque ink, so if you stamp on acetate, it will look black if it's sitting on white, and if it's, hold on, let me find some acetate for you. Because I know I had some sitting here. I've got a little acetate card here, so let me attempt to stamp on here with this so I can show you what I'm talking about. So you can see it is a little bit harder to get a really crisp impression. And I just want to wash that stamp real quick. But it is possible, and if you take your time and aren't filming like I am, it's probably easier. Let me give it one more go. Yeah. The other thing that could be really helpful for stamping on acetate, if you want to do that, is maybe like a stamp press, like the Misty tool, so that you aren't actually holding anything down. So apart from my shitty stamping, you can see what I mean. It does look really black when it's on white, but when it's on anything else, you can see it is actually slightly transparent, so it's not an opaque ink. Was the only point that I was trying to make with that. But so those are my 4 sort of most used inks, and all the other inks, I'm just going to show you like one color. I'm not going to go through and stamp all of my inks because I think the total came out to about 197 or something like totally ridiculous like that. I'm just going to show you how each of these stamps and why I like them. So the ones that I probably use the most often are the Color Theory inks from Studio Calico, and I do have a few of the ones from A Beautiful Mess, but like I said, they are, as you can see, the same inks. They are the same parent company that makes them. It was just slightly different branding, and I did have different colors. And the colours are why I like these inks. There were plenty of colours, and I think there are still plenty of colours available. I'm not sure how big ink is for them anymore, but they stamp really nicely. They're a dye ink and they dry really quickly, so there's no smudging for me, which is always a handy thing. And although they kind of, will this focus on here? So they do kind of look a little bit splotchy when you first stamp them, but that splotchiness does sort of smooth out, as it does with a lot of dye inks. That is one of those properties that I look for in a dye ink, is how much does it actually smooth out after it's been stamped. Not many of them look completely smooth as soon as you stamp them. I mean, that's a really shitty stamping, sorry, but a lot of them will smooth out really well, and one of the ones that does smooth out, I think the best, is the Hero Arts inks. These are one of my favorites. They are probably a bit pricier, I think, and I don't often buy huge pads like this, and you can see that's actually taken up the ink from my, yeah, very much so. That's unfortunate. Right, I've just tried to give this a bit of a better clean so I don't contaminate the rest of my ink pads. I guess that is one of the unfortunate things with stays on, and I know that Hero Arts inks, they do kind of have that property in them. To clean them, you kind of have to use more of the ink pad. So you can see the more you use it, the cleaner it will get. And this, if I stamp over here, over the same spot, you can see it doesn't really affect the ink pad. It will get cleaner and cleaner the more you use it. So the ink pad looks grubby, but it doesn't really affect the color of the ink. But I've forgotten what I was saying. The Hero Arts ones does tend to blend together the most. I have a lot of these little dewdrop mementos, and the reason for that is because you don't have to spend $1 million to get a million colors. I bought some bigger packs of these. There might have been like 12 colors in each pack, and I bought a few different packs just because I did want a few more colors than what I had without spending $1 million. And this was a good way to do it. The downside of that is that you do have to be careful when you're inking up, because you don't have that bigger surface area to stamp, say, a stamp in like this size. So you do have to pat it around a little bit, but you can see it stamps really nicely as well. Another one of the inks that I use a lot are these ombre pads from Hero Arts, because I like the Hero Arts inks, like I said, but I also love the ombre look. And there's lots of different techniques you can do for like repeat stamping that work really well with these ombre pads. So the trick with the ombre pads is they have 3 little strips in them. They are 3 distinct pads. And so if you just stamp them up and down, you will get quite a distinct line. So the trick with the ombre pads is to tap them and move it around, which again doesn't distort the ink on the ink pad itself, but it means you get a nice ombre look on your stamping. And like I said, I've got 4 or 5 of these, and I really enjoy them for repeat stamping, because you can get that look of all different colored inks without having to do a whole bunch of different colored inks. So the ombre pads are one of my favorites. I do have a few of these little pigment inks. I've only got a couple from Color Theory, the same as the Studio Calico. They came in kits. I never purchased them separately. I don't enjoy the pad. It's got this really loose foamy sort of pad, and I don't enjoy how that stamps, so they're definitely not my favorites. And I do have a few of these Versacolor pads, again because they're cheap and little, and they're easy to use, And you do get, I think, a fairly solid colour with a pigment ink. I just don't enjoy using them for Project Life, for Traveller's Notebook spreads, that sort of thing, because they do smudge. So I am a little bit more careful with these ones. And I've run out of room on here, but the other ink that I said I don't use a lot for stamping is Distress inks, and I use these more for technique sort of things, so packaging, the packaging technique, or mixing in with modelling paste, or so more as a like a pigmented dye rather than for stamping. Probably for stamping these sort of thinner stamps, they're probably not that bad, but they stamp terribly as far as a solid stamp goes. Now, Distress inks, they're not necessarily made for that. They're more, I guess, handy for blending, which I do use them for those as well, but they're definitely not one of my most used inks. And then my new inks, these Catherine Pooler inks, couple of you suggested those, and I grabbed this like 8-pack. And now I have to get all the colours. I really, really like these inks. They are super hard to get a hold of here in New Zealand, and I'm trying to resist because I do obviously already have a lot of inks, but if I have to replace anything, I will replace them with these. They're a very different sort of ink, and it has taken me a really long time to get used to the actual pad of the stamp, because it is very very soft, very juicy sort of pad, but they just stamp so solid, so perfectly the first time. I really, really like them. So if I get up close here, you can see there aren't huge differences. I think when buying inks, it's probably best to experiment and maybe just get one, you know, 1 or 2 from each range, and see how you like them, see how they work for the way you stamp and what you want to stamp, the type of stamps that you use, the type of paper that you use. There's so many variables, it's so hard to say I recommend this one, this is all I use, because you can see I don't. I use a whole pile of different inks, and I'm always open to trying new ones, because you never know when you're going to find a new favorite. So one of the other things I find immensely helpful for using with my inks is my little ink swatch book. And I'm sure that I've mentioned this multiple times in videos, but I'll just go through it one more time for you guys. This is just like a super cheap clear file folder that I picked up from the stationery store, and I just printed out this template. I just created it in InDesign just with some circles, because I knew I had this circle stamp that I wanted to use. I wanted to use this stamp because it has a solid portion and some line portions, which is helpful to see how an ink reacts in both of those situations. And I printed out a whole pile of pages because I wanted to have them in sort of colour families. So that's what I've got here. When I printed out the template, I typed in the names of the inks that I had, and I also left space where I could for any additional inks that I would end up purchasing, like these Catherine Pooler ones. So I'll just show you, because I haven't put these Catherine Pooler ones in here yet. Super simple. Oops, you do need a block though. This is just regular, like regular sort of printer paper. So it's nothing special. I didn't necessarily need it to be particularly special. I just wanted to see how the ink reacts. So I'm just stamping the circle guidelines. I mean, you can hardly see them. They're super, super light, just to help me get it a little bit in place here. And I just will wash the stamp off. I'm just going to write the name under there. Nothing fancy, not as fancy as the rest of them, but you can see this way. I don't even take these sheets out of the folder, but when I've got something that I want to stamp on and I don't know what color to use, grab something here. Like, so you've got a page in here, it's really easy to say, oh, I'd like to use a yellow ink, but I don't know which yellow one to use. So I can hold this up against it and I can see, oh, this is too bright and this is too orange. Oh, this one actually works quite nicely. You can see how they look, because obviously the colors that are on any of the packaging are never perfect when it comes to how the actual ink stamps. So I mean, they're close, but they're not perfect. So I do find that this really helps. So I'm just going to carry on and do the rest of these. The other thing that I was saying with having the solid and the sort of lined part of the stamps is you can see how well they stamp, especially solidly. That's the hardest part for me, is finding an ink that stamps really nicely solid. So you can see the Hero Arts one does. Let me see how close I can get this. And the Color Theory ones aren't too bad. The Versacolor ones and the Memento are a little bit blotchier, and then you can see the Distress ink is definitely not built for this sort of thing. And the Catherine Paula ink, perfect. So that's why I've got the two different parts of the stamp. And yes, this is going to annoy me that it's the wrong way around compared to the rest of the page, but I'm going to have to learn to live with it because I'm not redoing the whole page. But it's really helpful to see, because if you're going to stamp with something solid, you do want to be able to get a nice impression. So this is also helpful as well as for color, but also for the quality of the stamping. So it always astounds me, like, I think one of the good things about this is, and you definitely don't have to have as many inks as I do, but it's helpful to see what sort of colors you have. So I mean, I could say, oh, I don't need another purple ink because I've got a million purple inks. And I don't use purple that often either. But you can see how this purple is really different to all of the other purples. So I think it's really helpful to have them stamped out in some form, whatever form that takes, so that you can actually see what it is that you've got. And it occurs to me that I've got one more in here, and I'm gonna put it do you know what I don't have? I don't have all my black inks in here. Which again, I think illustrates the point of why I think this is handy, because you can see all the differences in what you'd think would be a fairly consistent category. You would think that black ink is black ink, but this is why I'm still on my hunt for my black ink. And actually, I thought my new Gina K one was going to be the winner, and now that I stamp it all out, I really like this Umbrella Crafts black. So it's a tough choice, isn't it? Very tough. I do still like the crispness of the Memento Tuxedo black. It just definitely is not as black as some of these other ones. but hopefully you can see why this little inky swatch book is a very helpful tool indeed. So that's it, guys. That's my ink tour. Let me know if you've got any questions or I haven't explained anything properly or there's anything you want to know. Just leave a question for me and I will do my best to answer that. And if there are any other recommendations for inks that you guys have, let me know as well, because I always enjoy finding new favorites. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you again real soon. Bye!